All right, good morning. Welcome to Fayetteville Baptist Church Sunday School. Our lesson is called Compassion Demonstrated. It's on page 28 if you have a book and you're following at home. Before we start, do we have any prayer requests? I have one, Robin Carter, okay, texted me this morning. She said, remember her family in prayer, especially they're going through some issues, and just want us to pray for her and for her family. So please remember Robin Carter, okay? We all love Robin and her family, so please remember them. Okay? Any others? Okay? All right. We're continuing our study in Proverbs. I love the first sentence. It says, love for God is purely academic if it's not expressed in real ways toward people. You know, this goes along with what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 13, I believe it is, where he says, though I have all this kind of faith, and though I would endure fire, and though I would do all these things, and I have not love or have not charity, then it prevaileth me nothing. That's what it's saying here. Because he goes on to say, how we treat others is the acid test of our spiritual maturity. But loving people is not always easy, especially those we disagree with. You know, in our time that we're living in now, a lot of times people disagree on a number of issues. And Dina made a point this morning on the way we were listening to some things. She talked about, and other people have said it too, it's okay, we agree to disagree. And we've talked about that spiritually, how there was disagreement among the Christians as to whether the eating of meat that had been offered to idols was okay. And Paul said, hey, if that's what you believe and it's okay. And others said, no, that's wrong. You know, we talked about, it's all about becoming more like Christ, not wanting people to become more like you. See? And in our society, I think as a whole, Christians and non-Christians too, if we emulated Jesus more, okay, and his attitude, rather than trying to get people to be more like us, and what Solomon is saying here is that how we treat other people is the test of our love for Christ. Because we don't have Jesus Christ on earth in physical form like they did 2,000 years ago, where they could feed him, care for him, show him the love. So how do we do that in 2020? How do we show that love for Christ? By what we do for others. Okay? He said, you know, the first commandment is, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and mind. The second is likened to it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And our neighbor is anybody we come into contact with. And so Solomon, in writing Proverbs 3, he was a parent. And a lot of this was written to his son to try to tell him, if you want to be a success in life, okay, and it begins, as we've said, with godly wisdom, that you know God, okay? He said, seek the wisdom of God. At the top of page 29, it said, wisdom is not only essentially characteristic of the life of the believer, it also produces joy. It says, wisdom is something that is acquired, pursued, embraced, and practiced. Wisdom from God is more important than personal opinions or preferences. It's not what I think or what I believe. It's what God said about it. Okay? Everybody has their personal opinions on truth and justice and all this thing, but what is it that God said? And I heard somebody say this week that the things that God said was wrong, okay, in the beginning are still wrong. And things that he said we should do are things that we should still do today. And he said, wisdom is like a tree that gives life to those under its shade. Joy is the outcome of the person who values and seeks godly wisdom. You know, sometimes we do something wrong, we expect punishment, right? I mean, and in the writing in the New Testament, I believe it was James that talked about how that when you do something wrong and you suffer for it, you're getting what you deserve. But when you're doing right and you're persecuted, okay, then he said that is pleasing to God. You know, like us being a little bit late this morning. I told Dina, I said, this isn't our fault. We left in time to be the earliest we've ever been. And we ended up being late because of construction we didn't see. and then the idiot driver exiting at the wrong exit, all those things together. But, you know, sometimes you can try to do the right thing, but the outcome will still not be what you want. But you can take assurance, Solomon wrote, and that knowing if you're following the wisdom of God, doing what you're supposed to do, he talks in the lesson about how you can lay down at night and sleep and not have a guilty conscience or feel bad. And he was writing these things to his son and said, you know, that you need to trust God, follow God's wisdom, and then you'll be able to lay down at night and sleep because you know that you've done things the right way. You know, we like to play rook, and some of you do. And we've got this little rook thing going on where we're playing. Well, my neighbor said they were the champions of rook when he worked. They used to play a lot. And he said nobody could beat us because we cheated. He said me and my partner had signals. And if I said so-and-so, or if I touched my ear this way, or said something, it means I had a certain color, and that's what I was bidding on. And I let him know if I had rook, and he said nobody could beat us because of that. And we were talking about it, and I said, well, you know, if I have to do, I don't want to do, if that's what it takes to win, I don't want to win that way. You know, how can you feel good knowing you won because you know, that's not the, you know, and we talked about that, and he laughed about that. And he said, you know, but that's what we did. And so, you know, we said, but what have you achieved if you've done that? And so what Solomon is saying is that you follow godly wisdom, and then when you accomplish something, or if you fail in it, you know that you did it the right way. Okay? And that's where he talked about earlier in Proverbs about don't hang out with thieves and outlaws and who try to get you to do the right thing because in the short run you can make some money, you can take a shortcut to this, a shortcut to that. He said follow godly wisdom, and those things will allow you to be successful in that you feel good about yourself, you feel good about your relationship with the Lord, and you're doing what's pleasing to Him. I'd rather the Lord be pleased with what I've done and everybody else be disappointed than everybody else to be pleased and happy about what I've done or what I've gone along with or what I signed off on in God to be disappointed. I think we would all feel that way. If you'll turn over to page 30, he talked about the benefits of godly wisdom, and one of the things he talked about were rest from fear. You know, Dean and I have been watching a TV series, and this family's always involved in things that are skirting the law. And it's always getting them in trouble with this group or that group because they're involved in things that are against the law. And they're always afraid that when there's a knock at the door, it's going to be the police. When there's a knock at the door, it's going to be the FBI. When there's a knock at the door, it's going to be somebody that's coming to kill them or somebody that's coming to arrest them. Because they have enemies in the criminal world, they have enemies in the police world. It seems like everybody's on them because of the activities that they do. And they really, and we talked about it watching this show, they can never have a peaceful moment. There's never a time when they can just relax and have, because their family's involved in this, that, and the other. And that's what Solomon is saying here. That when you live your life, you know, you don't have to sort of sleep with one eye open, so to speak. Okay? Now that's not to say that if you always try to do the right thing that you're not going to be the victim of a crime or something else. But he said, remember what we talked about, the difference between absolute promises and proverbs. Y'all remember how we talked about that? A proverbial saying is one that's true most of the time and is a guide, but it's not an absolute promise. Like God said, if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, you'll believe in thy heart that God has raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. That is an absolute promise. It is in concrete. In Proverbs, it says, train up a child in the way they'll go. When he's old, he's not, will not depart from it. But we all know examples of children that were raised in godly homes and turned out to be outlaws, so to speak. Right? But most of the time, when they are trained correctly, they turn out well. See, that's a proverb, a proverbial saying. It's true the majority of the time, but not all the time. And so Solomon is saying, you may run into trouble, but if you're using godly wisdom and following God, chances are, you know, you will have more joy, more peace, more rest, a lack of fear, because you don't dread that knock at the door. Okay? Does that make sense? And that's what he was saying. All right. Then in verses 23 through 26, he talked about having a clear conscience. You know, if your conscience is bothering you, that's a terrible place to be in. Have you ever had an issue where your conscience was bothering you? You wanted to make it right by confessing what you had done or this type of thing? And Solomon is saying, if you live your life in such a way as following godly wisdom, you won't be in these situations as near as much. We're all going to have some of that. Remember we talked about in our message a few weeks ago, we talked about genuine guilt, okay, where we have done something wrong and we've not confessed it, we've not tried to make it right, and we feel guilty. Well, that's real guilt. And then we have what was called false guilt, where something that happened was not your fault, but you still feel guilty about it, right? And I think the example I used was like the family that had the little girl that went swimming. And they said, stay in the shallow end, I'll be out there in a minute. And the child drowned, and they felt guilty about it for years. Well, that's false guilt. And then there's guilt that we have, and this is Satan, I believe it's his favorite weapon, to where we have guilt over things that we have confessed, and our sins that we've confessed to God, turned over to him, that God has forgiven us about, wiped the slate clean, but we still have guilt. Those are the things we find ourselves asking forgiveness for what? Time and time again. Okay? And Solomon is saying if you live your life as such that you're not a constant doer of these things, you won't always worry and have these fears and these problems, and you can live your life without fear of retribution in the sense that you have done wrong and it's coming. It's coming. Okay? All right, on page 31, where it says kindness expressed, it says, Solomon gave 4 examples of the way the Lord expects his people to treat others with fairness and compassion. And you know, if we follow these teachings, that would solve almost all of society's problems. That would solve almost all of our problems. That would solve racial problems. It would solve our nation's poverty problems. There's plenty of money to go around for everybody to have a decent living. Wouldn't you agree with that? The problem is the money's just not scattered right. You know, for those that play rook, and Al and I played together the other day, or we attempted to play, okay, we got beat just like the guy that has the big draw in the bank. That's how we got beat. We did win one game. But the problem was that a lot of times, you know, if you play rook, you run into trouble if you get the bid if the trumps aren't scattered. See, one night I had 6 trumps. My partner, of course, had none. My opponent over here had 1. The other guy had 5. And that got me into trouble. See, if the trumps had been scattered, that'd have been okay. Well, that's the same thing with wealth. There's enough money in the world for everybody to have, especially in the United States, a decent standard of living. It's all about how the money's distributed, how it's scattered. Same thing goes with how we treat each other. You know, if we would, I saw a sign the other day I thought was interesting. It said, drive like your children live here. Okay? In other words, you would drive slowly and carefully if your children live there. But we ought to have that same compassion over somebody else's children, that we need to drive and be safe and be careful. If we always turn the other cheek mentality, and he talks about sharing what we have and giving to someone in need. And he says if you'll follow these principles, then it will help you to have the life where you don't have guilty conscience and those type of things. And so, you know, I think that would solve a lot of things. So let's look at those 4. He said, first, withhold not good from them to whom it is due when it is in the power of thine hand to do it. What he's saying here is if you owe somebody money for something, if you hired them to do a job and you have the money to pay them, then pay them. If you bought groceries and you have the money to pay for, or whatever the situation is, it says it's probably a reference to someone who's been working. We agree on the amount of money. When he completes the job, he should be paid. And in other words, don't say, well, right now I'm having, this is what you hear a lot in baseball, a cash flow problem. Have you heard that? The owners are talking about they have a cash flow problem. They own these teams. I heard something the other day. The Kansas City Royals were bought in like 20 years ago for $90 million. $90 million. The guy that owned the Royals sold them like 18 years later for $1 billion. But there's a cash flow problem. See, in other words, you hire workers, you should pay them. The Bible teaches us that you should pay them a fair day work for a fair day pay. And so that's what he's saying here. Okay? Secondly, he said, say not to thy neighbor, go and come again, and tomorrow I will give it. When somebody comes to you, your neighbor comes in need. It talks about, at the top of page 32, if somebody comes to you, said, too often we make excuses. I'm too busy. It's not the right time. I'll help later. I don't know how to help. That keep us from obeying God and helping others because we, maybe at that time we're just too busy. And I think about this a lot of times. My daughter got on to me last week. We went to Memphis. And I think I may have told you this. A man came up and he said he was with the 82nd Airborne. He was retired and he was helping to get people off the street, help veterans. And I told you before, he was asking for $7. For $7, they could get a vet off the street for a night, put them up in a place, give them a meal, that type of thing. And so I didn't know if he was legitimate or not. But a lot of times, that's not our call. But like I say, we have to be smart. You can't be stupid. Don't be stupid. Okay? I have a tendency to be stupid. All right, so I gave him, I said, well, here's $10. Do a vet and a half. Okay? And Aaron was like, Daddy, you're so stupid. Okay? That guy wasn't in the 82nd Airborne. That guy doesn't do it. He just took that money and took it for this or for that or the other. Okay? And she's probably right. But if I had walked away from that situation, I would have felt bad. Especially if I learned later that guy was really being truthful and really needed help.
Well, I found out if the Lord lays something on your heart like that, if you see somebody, you got to do whatever He tells you to do. And whatever they do with that money, that they'll answer for that. But, there are several times when I would go to work in Birmingham and I would see somebody hungry or whatever. And even as an example, when we were on our trip, there was a guy, Rodeo Drive, McDonald's, and there was homeless people everywhere.
Yeah.
This guy he had a sign and he come sit right in front of the exit at McDonald's and said, need money for food. And I did a video about that. Somebody through the drive-through gave him some food. He opened it up, looked at it, and set it down. He didn't want money for food. But that's what his sign said, and that's what that person gave him. So he has to answer for what you do.
Yeah, exactly. It's all like we've always heard. If somebody wants money for food, take them somewhere and buy them something.
Yes.
Don't give them cash. That type of thing. But I wasn't in a situation where I could do that.
Right.
If
Right.
I messed up, I just messed up.
No.
You go back to the story of where it talks about the man who asked Jesus about 3 times. You don't know.
Yeah,
You don't know.
And obviously to her, and of course she lives in Atlanta, she probably sees that kind of thing a lot more than I do in Alexander City or Madison, okay, or any of them other multiple places I live from time to time. Okay, it burdens me. And one of the things she got onto me for, now this was the stupid part. I had a good bit of cash in my wallet. She said I was just right there on the street, just pulled my wallet out, was looking through the money, trying to find it. She just got all over me about that. But like you say, you have to do what you feel led to do, but you also have to have some sense.
You do. You do.
And balance safety factors, okay, against, all these kind of things. We were on a public street, and he even said this. There was a cop standing here to that door. He said, there's a policeman right here at works this beat. He said, you can go ask him if I'm legit. Okay? Now, if he was lying, he ran a good bluff. If I went over to that policeman and said, hey, is that real guy? No, that guy's not. I've run him in 2 or 3 times, Or I could have run and said, yes, he is legit. But I guess if he was lying, he was banking that I wouldn't go ask him. And if he was telling the truth, then I would hate it not to have hit him. So I just took the chance. Okay? All right, look at the bottom. It says a third example of compassionate treatment of others is found in verse 29. Devise not evil against thy neighbor. Now, this neighbor in the Bible doesn't refer to the person that lives on either side of you. The neighbor refers to who?
Anybody.
Anybody you come in contact with. We've all heard the parable of the Good Samaritan, and Jesus said, and they said, who was my neighbor? And Jesus told them that parable, where the Samaritan passed by, the other man passed by. I'm sorry, the priest passed by, the other guy passed by that was supposed to be a good guy. The Samaritan, who was looked down upon as the dregs of society, he stopped and actually helped him. See, he said, who was the neighbor to the one? And they said, the one that helped him. Okay, and he said here, do not devise evil against thy neighbor. A lot of times people will do things to their neighbor, aggravate their neighbor. It mentioned in here something about being a disturbance, being a disruptive to your neighbor. It talked about frivolous, it mentioned in here somewhere about frivolous lawsuits against your neighbor and other things. But it also talked about gossip against your neighbor also. And I thought about that. We all know people that are gossip. Now, I would dare say that most people, to some extent, are gossips. Would you agree with that? To some extent. Everybody may tell a little bit. But some people, that is their thing they love. I had a preacher friend of mine tell me one time, he had a lady in his church that was the worst gossip. She talked about everybody. She stirred up more trouble in the church. And it says in the Bible that God hates those that stir up trouble on the brother. That she was horrible. She kept the church in constant turmoil and all this. And he said, they had revival one night, and he was preaching, and she came forward, and she said, I realized that I've been wrong. She said, I want to, he talked about lay your sins at the altar and all that. She came forward, and she said, I want to put my tongue on the altar. And he told her, and he said, lady, that altar's 20 feet long. If you think you can get it up there, you try. Okay? Now, I'm sure he said that part in jest. But, you think about it. The Supreme Court has said, what about words, Al? Words can be what? Weapons. Absolutely. Yeah. And you know why? If you say something to somebody that's very offensive to them, and you hit them because they said that, the Supreme Court has ruled there are some cases where words that are said to somebody are worse than a slap in the face. And so there was a case where somebody used a bad word towards somebody and they hit them, and then they sued them, and then that's when the Supreme Court said words can be weapons. And Al preached about this in his children's message one time about sticks and stones can break no bones, but words can never hurt. There's never been a bigger lie told than that. I mean, words can absolutely crush a person, and especially if you stir up trouble against somebody. Okay? And we probably all got somebody in our neighborhood that knows everything about everybody and wants to tell it to them, whether it's based on truth or not. And so he said, don't do that. And then the fourth one, he said, strive not with a man without cause if he have done thee no harm. Let a sleeping dog lie. Don't stir up trouble. If there's not any trouble, we have a guy that's over our baseball, and he may be watching this morning. We have a guy that's over our baseball, and he'll always say, if there's no trouble, don't start any trouble. In other words, there's restrictions on what color your pitching sleeve is supposed to be. It's supposed to be, it can't be white or gray. Well, we had a game one time where it had a green looking sleeve on. He was pitching. Okay? And neither team said anything about it. The manager of either team. And then the umpire that was with me about the sixth inning said, you're going to let him pitch with that illegal sleeve on. And I said, well, they hadn't said anything about it. The other team hadn't said anything about it. Why start it up now? Go out in the sixth inning, and try to get him to take it off. And then that coach is going to say he's already pitched, in my opinion, it wasn't gray anyway, But, don't stir up trouble if it's not there. Okay, live peaceably. If your neighbor, if there's something that happens and your neighbor can benefit from it, let them benefit from that without being the one that is always trying to get ahead, always wants, don't despise thy neighbor, don't reject thy neighbor, help them out. As somebody, used to a lot of times, my mother would send me to my neighbor to borrow, when I was little, to borrow an egg or borrow a couple of milk. Have y'all ever been sent to do that or sent one of your children? We don't do that much anymore. I guess because we're afraid we'll get back milk and it's had drugs put in it, or we're afraid that the egg may be from a buzzard or something, one of them big ones like on the Flintstones. When you crack an egg, they feed 20 people with it or something. But I remember one day in particular, I'd go to borrow an egg. I said, Mama wants to borrow an egg. She'd send a dozen eggs. Or a cup of milk, she'd send a half-gallon of milk or something like that. I think Jesus is saying that's what you need to do with your neighbor. Don't just meet their needs. Go beyond that. Go beyond that. And Solomon is saying in the writing of Proverbs, if you do those things, then you won't have trouble sleeping at night from guilt. Now I say that, and I keep looking at Dina because she has horrible, terrible trouble sleeping at night. I mean, she has terrible trouble sleeping at night. Okay, and it's not, I don't think, because she has a guilty conscience, because she is a wonderful lady. And I'm saying that on the record. But she has trouble sleeping at night. And the least little thing can keep her from sleeping. Well, Frank was in the bed, and he was laying diagonally instead of vertically. Or there were too many dogs in the bed, or a cricket chirped outside, or something. So she will put in earplugs, and she will wear a mask. Okay, just all these kind of things. And so we're not saying that the reason people can't sleep is because they're guilty. But what he's saying is you don't have to worry about the guilt factor if you treat your people like that. And then he finally closed it up by saying, don't use violence or intimidation. At the top of page 34, he said it would be tempting to envy somebody. And I thought about this with, if you ever saw the movie Rocky, before he was a boxer, what was it? No.
Was it a cab driver?
Huh?
A cab driver?
No?
He collected money.
Hey, they're good, Wendy. Say it again, Wendy.
He collected money that was owed to gangsters.
Yeah, he worked for Longshaw. Don't you remember that guy that he worked for, helped sponsor him? He said, I got you, Rod, I got your back, and all that. And he went down there and he would bounce that ball. And he told that one guy, said, you need to make your payment. I'm on the break so if you don't. That kind of thing. And he said it was tempting. Solomon's writing to envy those people because, they can prosper for a season. The one thing we need to remember is that sin will always make us go further than we want to go. Do things we want to stay longer than we want to stay. Those type of things. And Solomon's saying don't get caught into that trap of temporary gratification with long-term consequences. Okay? And so he's preaching about that. And also, he said, love your friend and your enemy. That's one of the hardest things to do, I think, is to love your enemy. Is to be good to those. It's not hard to be good to those that are good to us. But it's really tough to help those that we know can never help us. We don't mind helping somebody if we know later they can help us. Right? But later on, you might need a favor, and this guy can do me a favor, so I will help him. But what about that person that you're relatively sure will never be able to do anything for you? Okay, Solomon is saying that's the kind of person you help, because Jesus himself said, when you do it unto the least of the one of these, you do it unto me. And so, Solomon's saying, follow that teaching of do it unto the least of the one of these. And I underlined that last paragraph. It said, foolish people cannot expect to enjoy the promise of being honored by God. Instead, they will experience shame. The Lord will disgrace them. That's the certain fate of fools who ignore him. In due time, they will pay the price of their foolish choice. In other words, he said, don't be caught up in the lights and the bells and the whistles and the attraction of things that are temporary, that are short-lived, but see the big picture and live your life that will be pleasing before God. What time we got there? All right, and so in my context, is the last thing. He says, God offers his peace to those who trust him. Man, how nice it is to have a clear conscience. God expects His people to treat others with kindness. We talked about that. And finally, God blesses those who know Him. And just remember, the blessing may not always be financial. There's a lot of other ways God blesses us that aren't financial. Good health, good sleep, that good parking place in front of Walmart. But you get the idea. And so Solomon is writing those things to his son to say, godly wisdom, live to please Him. All right? Thank you.